And I believe we are live on Facebook.
Live over here, going live over here. Yes, hello and welcome to another episode of Comic Shop Talk, brought to you by Black Cat Comics in Rockin' Milpitas, your one-stop shop for all things superhero. Shop online at black-cat-comics.com. We're here keeping you connected to the comic book community. I'm Mark.
I'm Francie.
And we have a very special guest star today, Mr. Jim Zub.
Hello, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Welcome, Jim. Thanks for joining us. We're really excited to have you.
No, it's awesome. It's great to, I'm glad you guys have got this going. It's a nice little thing to have and stay in touch with your customers and do kind of outreach on all those things. I think that's amazing.
For sure. You know, these days, anytime, it's always fun to hang out and talk comics. But these days, you know, I think everybody needs distraction, something fun to do. So that's why we started it. And no, we just keep it rolling every week because it just keeps being fun.
Awesome.
So you are a writer extraordinaire. You've been in the biz a long time. And artist. Skull Kickers, Wayward. Right now it's Empyre Avengers.
That's right, and Conan the Barbarian as well. So
Conan
I'm also
the Barbarian.
I do the official Dungeons and Dragons comic. I did Rick and Morty versus D&D. I've done all kinds of different stuff. Samurai Jack back in the day for IDW. I've done a little bit of stuff on Street Fighter. I did 2 of the weekly event series for Avengers. So I did Avengers No Surrender and No Road Home with Al Ewing and Mark Waid. Black Panther and the Agents of Wakanda, Champions, Thunderbolts, all kinds of fun stuff. Yeah, it's been a really fun ride and an amazing experience. One of the coolest things, it sounds kind of weird, over here, this is like a shelf of my stuff, and there's another shelf, and there's like 2 more below it of books. Some of them are foreign editions, and some of them are, you know, deluxe editions or whatever. And in my head, I thought if I could ever have half a shelf of books, that would be like the greatest thing I can imagine. And now I have shelves of books. It doesn't seem real to me. It's amazing.
That's great.
I love working on this stuff, love doing the superhero stuff, love sword and sorcery. And yeah, you know, missing the convention season, obviously, but also kind of thankful that you know, friends and family are safe and that we were able to stay in touch digitally. And I've even been playing some Dungeons and Dragons and stuff digitally, which has been kind of fun. So jump on a camera and play role-playing games with my friends and stay in touch with people. So it's been good, all things considered. Like, it feels like every sentence has to end with all things considered. You know, I'm okay. I'm doing all right. And
Good.
you know, there was a slowdown for work for a little bit, but now things are really kicking back into gear, and I've got deadlines lining up, and it's like, oh yeah, right, okay, got to really dig in and write up a storm, which is good. So
That's awesome.
What's the big thing you're working on right now? What's the big thing you want everybody looking out for?
Sure. So Conan the Barbarian has been on break. We had so Conan's a dream project for me. It's a character I've always wanted to write, let alone on a regular basis. And so we launched sort of the second year of Conan with issue 13. I took over from previous, it was Jason Aaron and Mahmoud Esrar, and now it's me and Raj Antonio. And we launched in February. We had 2 issues come out, and then the world spun off its axis. And I've just been waiting to get those other issues out the door. And so we're back in October, and so now is a good time to pre-order for it. I am super pumped for people to read these issues. I was pumped 6 months ago for people to read these issues, and now it's like excruciating. I can't wait to see what the fans think and you know, really dig in on it. So I've been pushing really hard, whether it's the Robert E. Howard kind of fans or old school Conan fans, come back, check this stuff out. And really see what we've got cooking there. At the same time, I'm also doing, you know, Empyre Avengers, which is coming out now. The 3rd issue comes out on Wednesday. And so that's just a 3-issue miniseries. Yeah, that's been a ton of fun. I love the Avengers. Working in the Avengers office with Tom Brevoort and everyone else there is amazing. It's such a great crew. And I got to put together a really fun kind of cross-section of characters that don't always get the spotlight. So in Empyre Avengers, you've got Black Knight, you've got Scarlet Witch, Vision, Dr. Voodoo's in there, Luke Cage, like just a bunch of really cool characters, Mockingbird and Wonder Man, Quicksilver, all kinds of stuff. I love those characters. And so getting the chance to dig in with them and have sort of show what's happening around the world during the events of Empyre on Earth has been really cool. And getting to have those fun kind of little character moments and big action stuff, it's been great. A central part of that story is the Savage Land. So you've got Khazar and Shanna the She-Devil, as well as the Man-Thing shows up in this. So it's like just this cool, those elements that make the Marvel Universe special, those really cool locations and those fun kind of characters, and combining them together in interesting ways. I love that kind of stuff, and digging back into some of the old storylines and pulling new kind of elements out of them and surprising readers with that stuff. That is like one of the things I love most. It was something that I loved when I was a kid, when I would read Marvel books, and now getting to do that stuff, getting to inject it into the books and do callbacks and fun little nods to stories that I love. That is, it's an honor, honestly, to be able to do this stuff and to be able to put new kind of bricks in the house of ideas, if you will. Yeah.
That touches on two of the big things that I wanted to talk to you about.
Sure.
One is writing Conan, exactly what you say. You have, he's a literary pop cultural phenomenon. Everybody knows Conan. Conan's awesome. I was really happy to see it come back to Marvel. I love Dark Horse. Don't get me wrong. It isn't anything about Dark Horse. It's just about, it felt like a coming home. Like you said, there's a lot of Marvel, old school Marvel fans that remember Conan. And let's face it, Marvel has a broader reach, gets out to more folks. And so getting Conan back out there was really awesome. And they're doing a great job. You're doing a great job with it. It's a lot of fun. And the other side of that is everything that goes along with writing Avengers. You talk about writing Avengers is my thing. Captain America is my thing.
He's got the whole run of both Avengers and Captain America.
And
it's the best. It's the best.
What you talk about from the creative aspect of being a kid and remembering those awesome stories and having those things lingering in the back of your head and getting an opportunity to one day write those stories and write those characters, and like Conan, as you said, put another brick in that wall, with your name on it. That's really cool.
Huge.
And from the fan standpoint, I'll gush for a second. You write the Avengers so well.
Thanks.
And with the no surrender stuff, I immediately fell in love with this, and it was as much fun as I'd had reading the Avengers in any point. For exactly the reasons you say. You get, the established characters, but in every great run of Avengers, there's these like D-list characters that the writer makes awesome. And Black Knight is almost always one of those guys. He's never the guy you're looking for, but he's always awesome when he shows up. So anyway, like I say, in No Surrender and in Empyre and different things, you capture those characters, the individuality and the coolness of those characters, and what makes them cool when you throw them all together into these wacky adventures.
I think what's really important for me is to always remember that whatever profile those characters have in the broader Marvel universe, to the fans and to me when I'm writing those stories, they're A-list characters. Like, they are the most important thing, because you have to care about them. You have to put yourself into them in order to make those stories matter, to make them worthy. You know what I mean? So even if I'm a fan of the character growing up, obviously it's a lot easier. I can just instantly pull on that kind of, nostalgic string and I get all kinds of energy out of it. But for other characters, like when I was doing Thunderbolts, I didn't read a lot of those books when they originally came out. I read some of them, but I didn't, follow the run like crazy. And Winter Soldier actually came out when I wasn't reading Marvel books. And so I had to go back and reread all that stuff and find that enthusiasm and find those kind of story threads. It's not just about nostalgia from when you're a kid. It's about doing the research and kind of going, hey, what is cool about this that I can get excited about now and put that into the books, So a character like Black Knight or Scarlet Witch, those are characters that have been favorites of mine since I was a kid. But other ones, cool, no problem. I'll find something neat to sort of pull on, or I'll find a neat angle, hopefully, that makes it fun to play in that sandbox with those toys. And so, that's part of my job, is to find angles on this stuff, or to get different ways of approaching the material that maybe you haven't quite seen before, but still feels appropriate when you read it, that you're like, oh man, I never imagined they would do this kind of adventure. But now that I've read it, I'm really glad I did, that it all feels like it fits together. And that's the joy of being in a shared universe like the Marvel or DC universes, where you have so many stories that, yes, it's intimidating in the broader sense of like, look at all this stuff that's been done before. How do you make something original? But on the other hand, you have this amazing well of material to constantly draw upon, that these characters are constantly growing and constantly changing. And so you can do stuff with them. You can try things out and you can push them in new directions and explore, what they're all about and what they mean, both to you and to the readers and stuff like that. And so that's just one of those things that I get a big kick out of, So something like the Savage Land and Khazar, the character hasn't been around very much recently. And so this is a chance to sort of, okay, what can we show something a little bit different? Or how can we make someone a fan of the character by the end? That it's not just about playing to your favorites. Like, okay, so a character like Living Lightning, who's in No Surrender, not a very well-known character, but Al Ewing had a really cool concept around, No Surrender was all about legacy. It was Marvel Legacy. That was the branding for the books at that point. And so we were exploring, what is legacy? Legacy is about, what you'll be remembered for and what you are doing and what you're trying to build out of your own deeds. And so Living Lightning was a character who hadn't had much of a legacy and hadn't really had a chance to build much. And that was the angle we sort of took. He's like, man, I was on the Avengers and no one even remembers who I am. Will they ever remember, will I ever get another shot? And then he does, and he's got to kind of make the most of it. And then you're looking at the idea of a character like Voyager, where she has, not too big of a spoiler, but she's a false legacy. She's created a history and inserted herself into the timeline of the Avengers and is sort of building this false legacy out of it. So we sort of took different angles of the same, of this concept, this theme, and explored it through the story. And that's what was so fun about it. It was a fun way for us to jam together. Mark Waid knows continuity like crazy. So does Tom Brevoort. They're like the kings of continuity. So it was really fun to be able to dig into really obscure little bits. And then Al's so passionate about doing the same kind of stuff that I do, going into that history of Marvel and making the most of those moments and trying to redefine them or recontextualize them as we move forward, because that makes the whole thing feel bigger. It makes it feel interconnected and enjoyable and entertaining, because you're constantly reflecting on itself and you're constantly building on that amazing foundation, So
when it was so fun, I love things, certainly as a fan, and I always say I'm an easy fan to satisfy. But one thing I love as a retailer, and what you're talking about, so nailed it. I love the things that an old guy like me, I've read every Avengers book ever.
Right.
And part of it is I always say, you love the superhero kind of standard thing, the action, the hero always wins, whatever it is, the formula. But I want to see something fresh and new. I don't want to read the same comic over and over again. And so when I can read something and it feels fresh, new, and exciting, and I can hand it to a kid or I can hand it to a new reader and they totally get it. They don't have to know 50 years of the Scarlet Witch. They don't have to love Vision like I do. They can pick it up and they'll learn to love Vision like I do, because this story is as awesome as the George Perez one I read back in the day. And I think that's so important for comics.
Absolutely. And I think if you head into this material as a creator and you sort of like, look, one good story can make someone a fan, for years, for a lifetime, frankly. Those, if you do it right, if you go into it and you put something really exciting and potent and powerful down on the page and you're able to deliver on that, people remember. And one of the most enjoyable things is when someone comes to me at a convention and brings me their favorite issue or brings me a run of these books and says, man, I haven't been excited about books like this in ages. Or someone says, oh, I used to be in comics 20 years ago and now I'm back into it and this is my new favorite thing. And you're just like, oh, that's what you want. That's the kind of exuberance that you hope for when you work on a project. When I was doing Samurai Jack and people would say to me, this feels like when I was watching the cartoon, and this, this is so cool. And this is like what I always wanted to see, another season of the show or stuff like that. Or when people bring me the Dungeons and Dragons comics and they're like, this feels like I'm at the table with my friends and there's just this crazy, kooky, sword and sorcery action, and I don't know what's going to happen next. And that's what it feels like when you're playing D&D with your friends. And it's like, yeah, we're all kind of trying to channel that energy, that excitement, and make it special, and surprise people. One of the things I really like about some of my favorite, Marvel writers, whether you're talking about, Ed Brubaker or Dan Slott or Gail Simone when she was doing like Deadpool or all this sort of stuff, like these books that every month I didn't need to know what was coming next. I just wanted to dig in and enjoy and be surprised, If people are questioning why they're picking this up on a month-to-month basis, or if they're sort of dreading, the end of it, or they're worried about all those things, you're not doing it right. Like you got to catch them in that moment. You got to really kind of, hopefully they're riding the lightning with you and excited to see what's coming next, rather than worrying about the broader kind of, I know all the PR and all the hype and all the stuff that has to happen around solicits and, announcing new projects and new number ones and all that kind of stuff. And the business end of it obviously is important, but fan exuberance and excitement also kind of carves through a lot of that. And something, perfect example, I think it was like issue 13 of Thanos, when Donny Cates came on board with that Thanos wins story. You'd think it was a new number one. It was just like it hit like an atom bomb, and it put Donny on the map for a lot of people because it was a great comic, because it was really exciting, because it was something, it felt amazing and fresh and cool, And so it doesn't have to be about a new number one. It doesn't have to be about, all the variant covers and all that stuff. It's just like a damn good comic, and put it in someone's hand and go, you should read this. This is great. And that's where it starts.
That's 200% true. And I'm an old guy. I get accused of a lot of things because I'm an old guy. And will you say that because you are into paper comics? Or you say that because this and that? And while that may be true, I don't feel it's true. I agree with what you say. I think what made comics work in the golden age, in the silver age, in the 80s, in the 90s, still works this Wednesday, next Wednesday, every Wednesday. You have an awesome cover, and somebody sees the awesome cover and they're like, I want to read that. I see Captain America on a cover. I want to read that book. I don't think about the $4. I think about, I want to read a book with Captain America on it. Then I read the book and it's awesome. It just, you're turning pages and then it's awesome. And you get to that last page and you're like, holy cow, I got to see what happens to Cap next issue. Exactly. That worked when we were kids. It works now. It will always work. Like I say, the marketing changes, the things change. But what it all boils down to is the excitement of reading the story. And then, like I say, the things that keep with you. And a little to that point, another plug for you.
Thank you.
Another thing I always say is, people about the events, and there's always too many books and too many crossovers, talk about marketing and all these things. And I always tell folks, that may or may not be true, but check it out. Check out the first issue, and if you like it, keep reading it. You don't have to read all the stuff to get the main book. If you read the side book, it'll probably be fun. And this is exactly that. If you pick this up and you read it, you want the next one. And when the comic book guy at the store knows what Bob likes and he says, hey Bob, you're gonna like this, like you say, that's what has always worked, and that's what has always kept comics going. You can hype things all you want, but it still has to be a great book.
And the reality is, when a book is exciting and done well, it will start to sell itself, in the sense that readers will tell other people to check it out. Like, the top-down marketing is part of the whole, structure, of course, and the retailer one. But if you recommend something to someone and they start to distrust your taste because they think you're just trying to sell them something, they won't come back. They won't keep picking it up, So if you put your name behind it and you say, hey, I think this is going to be really awesome, this is totally up your alley, and then it is, they want to hear what's next. They're excited about what's going on, and that's the thing. Yes, we are, in some ways, we're competing against this massive archive, decades worth of stories. But the one thing that we have that they don't is new. You know, you haven't read this before. You couldn't have read this before. You don't even know what's coming next. You know what I mean? And that is a potent thing. And so you get something like Dan's Superior Spider-Man, where, you know, just the audaciousness of the storyline and what are you doing? Doc Ock and Peter's dead and all this crazy stuff. And people are enraged and freaking out, but they're talking about it and they're super excited. Like, how can you get away with this? Well, keep reading and we're going to find out, you know. That's kind of the point. That's the excitement of these things when you're doing it. And in some of probably the majority of the most seminal storylines for these characters are the ones where they do shake it up, where they do something audacious and crazy. And, hey, you can't do that. That's too far, too much. You know, you can't kill that character. You can't change that paradigm. And yet that's going to be the one you remember, not just, you know, like Spider-Man stops a bank robber or something. Right? So
that's two more things that you mentioned that I love to talk about. As far as keeping comics going and things like that. One, again, to your credit, you know, I'm an old guy, I'm reading Avengers, and a lot of us old guys, exactly what you say. At some point, we're weighed down by, you know, why am I reading this? I can just go home and read my classic ones that I loved back in the day. I got hundreds of long boxes at home. I'll just go home and read that stuff. But then you pick up the new issue of Avengers, and it excites you just like those do. It's important that guys like you come along and keep it going, keep it fun, keep it exciting. Like you say, keep the characters fresh, all those kind of things, because we need the next group of creators that keeps all this going. Secondly, as you say, creatively, and Superior Spider-Man is such a great example. You got to do those things. I always say comics needs to do two things all the time. They need to throw away everything and start over again and give us something wacky and new and a new costume and new powers and red and blue Superman, right? And
you can't do that.
But
gosh.
Then you need to bring it back. Then you need to run all the way out there with your crazy, zany, you know. When they had Captain America and Dimension Z and all that, I loved it because it was something I hadn't seen in forever. But then you do that, and then you pull them all the way back, and you have them fight Nazis and then the Red Skull and whatever, and that kind of keeps it. As a retailer, one of my favorite things was during Superior Spider-Man, everybody would come in and put 2 copies on the counter and complain and tell me why they hate that book and they're so mad and this and that and sell me these 2 copies. I need one to read and one to put in my box.
Right. Well, this is the thing. I had quite an intense conversation with a fan at New York when Superior Spider-Man was going, and we were talking about all kinds of comic stuff, and you know, they said how much they love my books and all this stuff, and then they said, what are you reading that you're enjoying? Because I'm curious, you know, your taste in superhero stuff. And I said, Dan's Superior Spider-Man is knocking me out. It's amazing. And he was just like, what? Like, he was so angry. And I said, why are you so enraged? And he was just like, well, because it ruins the character, it ruins the legacy, it ruins all this stuff. And I was like, okay, but at the end of the point of these books and the point of these characters is you have to test them, right? Like if it was just about these characters hanging out and everything goes their way, there's no drama, there's no excitement, there's no entertainment. So if great power, you know, comes with great responsibility, how do you show that? You have to show that by showing what happens when someone has that power and no responsibility. Or, you know, Doc Ock has to now suddenly realize what responsibility Spider-Man has compared to the responsibilities he had. So you appreciate Peter more because you understand how someone else is approaching the exact same paradigm of being Spider-Man. On top of that, you know, when we're talking about putting these characters through trials, I mean, these are our modern myths, right? You're going to put these characters through the ringer. You're going to put them through these emotionally intense kind of dramatic situations. Like, what could be more dramatic than coming back from the precipice of death itself? I know that's really over the top and Shakespearean, but man, that's comics in a nutshell, right? Mm-hmm. So you're talking about, I mean, you know, Craven's Last Hunt was audacious and crazy, but it was also an amazing classic, right? Mm-hmm. The death of Gwen Stacy is crazy, but it's also an incredible, you know, story. Like, that's the whole point. That if I ask you to name 10 Spider-Man stories that are seminal, it's now kind of gonna show up in that list because it does something so wild and so over the top and kept people coming back month after month after month. And that doesn't mean that you do something purely to create anger. You know what I mean? When you're doing these storylines, there has to be a point to it, and you have to build it, and you have to, come up with these dramatic turns in a way that feels logical and what may have you within the crazy context of the Marvel universe or the DC universe or whatever. But try stuff, push and pull. And of course, the thing that always happens is by the time you are putting things back in the box or bringing things back to normal, whatever that may be, there's a certain segment of fandom that's like, oh, I kind of wish you hadn't. I kind of like Doc Ock as Spider-Man. And you're like, see, like that's how this goes every time, right? Because it was different, because it or it just grabbed them at that particular moment in their fandom. One of the difficulties for me as a writer, and I see a lot of writers indulge in this, and I indulge all the time, obviously. I want to write certain characters. I want to write big moments. I want to play with the things that I grew up on. But for me, one of the things I try and fight against is that tendency to just want to roll things back to the paradigm I remember when I was a kid, right? Mm-hmm. Like, just because I love Claremont X-Men, you can't recreate that. You know what I mean? You can't just put all the characters in those old costumes and put them in the same relationships and expect it's going to have the same resonance that it did when you were a kid. That to me feels like a mistake, where you're kind of stealing away from the evolution that those characters have had because you just want to write that particular era of a character. You know what I mean? And that's where I see something like, Hickman's X books are crazy and it's wild stuff. And there's parts of it I like and there's parts of it I don't like, but I'll tell you what, I don't know what's coming next. And that excites me. You know what I mean? And I like that they're trying stuff and they're kicking down walls and going crazy. And it's like, great. I was reading, House of X and Powers of 10, like intensely, there's a thing where there's sort of different categories of Marvel writers. So I'm a continuity writer. I'm writing one of the main, I'm writing monthly superhero books. And so we get sent all the books in advance via PDF so that we can keep up on what's happening in the Marvel universe. And we're talking about what's coming up and things like that. And, I was getting those PDFs of the House of X, but as soon as they hit my inbox, I would read them because I had to know what was coming next. And you guys were going to get them, a month later. And I was just like, oh, you're not ready. Like, it's just the craziest stuff, and that's a great sign. Like, if I, as someone who could easily be jaded, you know what I mean? And could easily be overwhelmed with so many books, and that like goes to the top of my reading pile because it's so crazy. And what are you going to do next? Let alone the beautiful artwork that they had, from Pepe and stuff like that. Like, it's just, that's great. Those are great books. Like, go get them. I hope you can keep that momentum. I hope that we continue to shock and amaze and entertain people, because that's the job, as much as possible.
Well, I think that's such a great example. Again, what makes comics work and what keeps comics going is, and I've been talking about it in this video. I do a Wednesday morning thing where I go through the books that are out every week. And, X-Men is something that has a huge history, all kinds of characters. Everybody has their favorite era. Everybody has in their mind what they think that character is, And so to come along and do what he's done and blow it up without starting over,
Right,
it's just,
right.
It's new.
That's the easy answer, is to just blow it up and be like, oh, don't worry about the old stuff at all. It's like, no, we're going to incorporate the old stuff. And you can also jump on as a new reader. That's an elegantly difficult thing to do,
For sure.
And for me, it's like trying to balance it out, that if I'm doing a new #1 or if we're launching this series, it has to be new reader friendly, but that doesn't mean throwing out the baby with the bathwater or pretending the past didn't happen, And I'm always impressed when a writer can do that. I'm always a little bit disappointed when someone just slams the reset button and just goes, okay. And all their shocks become, hey, remember that villain? They're back. And you're just like, oh, because you wanted to write that villain. Like, you got to give me something with that villain I haven't seen before. Or you got to give me a permutation or a scheme or something that I haven't seen before. Because otherwise, you're trolling your own nostalgia, hoping that you can be, as good as the stuff that you grew up on. And that's, you got to try harder. You got to go deeper. You know what I mean? And so that's kind of the trick that I find a really cool challenge and I find exciting. And part of my job is to convince the editor that this is the right path forward and to get them excited, because then they're in your corner and they can sort of sell it up the chain. And then hopefully, the readers see that enthusiasm and excitement as well. Yeah.
Another thing I'm loving like that is Savage Avengers. I'm hoping you get an arc on Savage Avengers, because when they pitched it, I'm like, wait, Conan, Punisher, and Wolverine?
Yeah, it just seems insane.
Yes, I want that book.
Right. It seems so insane. But what I love about it, and in order to do those kinds of books, you have to go for it. Like if you're going to do, and what Jerry does is whenever he's doing the book, he always goes for it. Like, it's like, yeah, you think it's going to be crazy? I'm going to make it crazier than you think. Oh, you think it's going to be wild? I'm going to take it over the top. And you're like, I gotta respect that. I told Jerry, we had a great phone call a couple months ago. We were talking about all kinds of different stuff. And I said, I don't know that I would have had the brass balls to do Conan 2099. Like, it just feels so far out of whack. But you went for it and you totally delivered on it. And I had a great time. I read it and I was laughing. I was like, this is awesome. And I don't know if I would have gone there. And in some ways, reading that sort of stuff makes me go, okay, I got to push. I got to go further. Not that I'm going to try and be Jerry Dugan, but just remember, you can kind of go for the fences with some of this stuff. Don't hold back just because you're worried. In some ways, that's your editor's job, is to sort of tell you, hey, I think you might be going a little too far. And you're like, okay, cool, rein me in. But up until that point, like, we got to try stuff. We got to brainstorm. We got to push out there, And I get a lot of Conan fans are in touch with me and they're excited about the book, or they're very passionate about the property. And I am too. And they'll say to me, oh, I hate Savage Avengers, or I hate, anytime Conan's crossing over with anything, right? Because it should be its own thing. And I'm like, I agree in the sense that the monthly Conan the Barbarian book is in the Hyborian Age, and it is its own kind of airlocked in thing. And Spider-Man's not going to show up in that monthly book. That you can just read the trade paperbacks and it's just going to be pure sword and sorcery adventure. Absolutely. But outside of that, man, just experiment, have fun, be cool. You know what I mean? It doesn't ruin where the stuff's at. It's like those Elseworlds books for me. When DC, as you're reading the monthly Batman book, you get your Batman. You're reading an Elseworlds book, like, go for it. Just go buck, because that's where you want to see those wild ideas and experimentation and cool different art styles and unexpected approaches. It doesn't ruin the character. It just proves how iconic they are, that they can be blown up and changed and altered and messed with, and they're still recognizable and they still function, So, yeah.
Do you remember your first comic that you ever got?
So, I mean, I grew up, obviously, you're reading whatever, like comic strips in the newspaper. And I would, I remember reading, I don't know if they had it in the States. There was a magazine called The Electric Company. It was a Sesame Street magazine. And they had Spidey super stories in there. Yeah. And so I remember those and the Spider-Man cartoon quite a bit. But the first comic that I bought, like with my own money, was probably G.I. Joe, the Marvel G.I. Joe books.
Nice.
And they would show the episodes, and at the end of the episode, after the credits, they would literally have a quick little spinning cover, and it would say, "Buy the Marvel comic." And I would go, "Yes, master." And I'd just like, go buy the book. I don't know why they don't do that on every single Marvel show.
Thank you.
Every Spider-Man show should end with "Buy the Marvel comic." It is like a 2-second blip at the end of the credits, and it would do wonders. So I start buying G.I. Joe, and then in the books, of course, they would have house ads for all the other stuff. Spider-Man was my favorite, and I realized, oh, there's Spider-Man books every month. I will start buying Amazing Spider-Man. So the first issue of Amazing Spider-Man I bought was I want to say like 231 or 232. It's got Spider-Man on the side of a wall, like clinging on the cobras, clinging on top of them. And then like Mr. Hyde is in that story and all this sort of stuff. It was just like a random issue. I think like Roger Stern wrote it or something. And it's not like a seminal storyline, but it was just cool. And I really liked it. And so I started collecting Amazing Spider-Man Monthly and trying to buy backwards at the same time. So I was trying to get back issues. I had a little checklist. And what I would do is I would buy Marvel Tales. And so on my checklist, if I bought a reprint like Marvel Tales, I would circle the number. And if I bought the real comic, I would color it in, because that meant I really had it, not just a reprint. And I was trying to get all the Amazing Spider-Man issues, like that would ever be possible. And I was obsessed for a long time. So I bought from like 231 or 232 all the way through to, man, we're talking Carnage's first appearance and stuff like that. So that's got to be in the 380s. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I stopped reading before 400. I know that. So, and then I had a big gap where I wasn't reading superhero books, but I was reading manga. And this was like untranslated manga, the earliest of the internet, where people were translating manga and you would print out on your dot matrix printer like a script to tell you what was happening on every page.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I was pretty obsessed with manga in the original Japanese. And I was reading a lot of indie books and a lot of Vertigo stuff, and just like, you were the cool mature books because I was older and those kinds of things. And then slowly but surely crept my way back to comics. It's not comics, to superheroes. And but I've never stopped reading comics. It's always just been different kind of phases of it,
Mm-hmm.
So
what about your first retail experience?
My first retail, like first time buying comics?
First time in a comic shop.
So there were two I grew up in Oshawa, Ontario, which is like a little blue collar town. There used to be a GM factory there, and the city's slogan is the city that motivates Canada. It's just the corniest thing. But yeah, downtown there was like 3 different comic book stores, because this was, the 80s, quite the height. There was a place called Ken's Comics, and that was usually my regular, because Dad would go pay the bills every month. Like he would go pay the power bill and the water bill and all that stuff. So he'd drop us off at the comic store, my older brother and I, and then he would pick us up on the way back. And then there was another comic store called Unicorn Comics, and that was like the higher class kind of really fancy store. And we didn't get out there very much, but I really liked that place because they had a lot of role-playing games and stuff like that. And then there was a used bookstore, and they had like just the boxes of old stuff but it was in terrible shape, but you'd buy it for like $0.25, so who cared? And we would just dig through those. And then we had a cottage like a couple hours out of town, north of the city, and there was a flea market up there, and they would just have boxes and boxes and boxes of comics. And so we would piece together runs of books from like the dregs of those, and we just loved them because they were so cheap, so you could just buy stacks of them for the same price as buying regular books. And so we would get runs of things that you wouldn't see anywhere else, because who the heck wanted it? But it was like, whatever, I just we just buy all that stuff. The book that kind of really galvanized me on the superhero stuff was the Official Handbook of the Marvel Universe. That was like, to a kid, yeah, it was interesting. Years later, I would talk to someone and they explain how there's a particular age where you're both sort of, you're not quite old enough to start rebelling yet. So what you're trying to find is structure. You just want to find structure in all things. That's where, video games, if a kid gets into video games at that age, they want to platinum every game. They want to get every secret. They want to do everything. Like, it's not just a game, it's like scraping it to the walls because there's a structure to it. You know what I mean? Or they'll memorize every Pokemon or whatever, because there's a structure to it. And my structure was the Official Handbook of the Marvel Universe, because I couldn't afford a lot of the expensive back issues, and they would constantly reference these older storylines, and you couldn't find easy reprints, and there weren't a lot of trade paperbacks. Like at that time, God, I think there was a trade paperback for like the Dark Phoenix saga and like Long Shot and like a couple other weird books, but you just wouldn't find them collected. And so reading the official handbook of the Marvel Universe was like, told you what happened and told you why it happened and how it all fit together. And in my head as a kid, I assumed it was like this beautifully planned out, structured thing. Because if you read the handbook, it makes it sound like this happens because this happened, because this happened, because this. And I'm like, wow, they plan it all out, not realizing that you're talking about dozens of writers who are just jamming and throwing insane ideas into the mix. And then, you know, these editors coming in on the handbook and codifying it all and clarifying it. And I love that thing. I love the feeling of that there was a structure and that it all fit together, and that it was one of the things I loved about the books, that if the Avengers were off in outer space and the Fantastic Four called Avengers Mansion, Jarvis would pick up the phone and goes, "Oh, I'm so sorry. They're, you know, all fighting the Kree or something." And like, they would tell you what issue it was happening in, and you're like, whoa, it's all real. Like, it all fits together. They know that these things are all happening at the same time. There was one, I was just telling a friend of mine about this the other night. That miniseries, Kitty Pryde and Wolverine. You remember that one? It was like a 4-issue mini or 5 issues. There's a random part in one of the issues where Wolverine goes out for a morning jog, and it's like winter. There's wind blowing and snow everywhere. And he's like, "Oh, this doesn't make sense. It's the middle of summer here in Japan." And then there's a little caption that says that what Logan doesn't know is that the casket of endless winters has been opened in the mighty Thor. And I was just like, wow, this is crazy. The weather's different because stuff happening in Thor. Like, that to me felt like the coolest thing ever, you know? So for example, that's why when we sat down to do something like No Surrender, I was so obsessed with things like, okay, well, the Avengers are fighting for Earth, you know, and the Grandmaster and the Challenger are using Earth as a battleground. What are the X-Men doing? And originally, Tom and everyone else was like, this is an Avengers event. Don't worry about what the X-Men are doing. And I was like, I worry about what the X-Men are doing because I'm obsessed, right? And we were bandying back and forth because we actually planned that book out at the Marvel office, like at a boardroom table. We all sat in a room and jammed for 8 hours to come up with that storyline. And I was obsessed with trying to take other people off the table so that we didn't have to justify why Wolverine wasn't in there. And I don't remember who said it. It might've been Mark. It might've been one of the assistant editors. Someone said, well, you can't just like freeze everybody. I said, what if we froze everybody? Like, what if we literally like, you know, if you say we can't, that's why we got to, okay, we'll literally freeze every hero that's not the Avengers. Well, why would you do that? Well, because it's a game, because there's rules, and because the Avengers don't know the rules, and and so we sort of built it backwards from my obsession with figuring out why other heroes weren't fighting for Earth, you know, just like dumb stuff like that. It's sort of funny how these things kind of happen in the creative process. But
that makes me want to ask the next question, which is, what's the craziest thing you've tried to pitch but weren't able to sell it to the editors? Something that you're really wanting to get at.
I mean, I've continually pitched. I can't say the exact thing because I'm still holding out hope. I really want to do a big thing with magic in the Marvel Universe. I want to do like a big transformative kind of thing about the system of magic and what magic is and can be. The craziest thing I pitched that we actually managed to pull off was the idea of the House of Ideas in No Road Home. And that was a pitch that I came up with. Well, so we did No Surrender, and we flew into New York, and the night before we, you know, our big jam session, Mark and Al and I went out for dinner, and over that dinner, you know, we talked about all sorts of crazy stuff. And at some point, Al Ewing basically pitched Mark and I the Immortal Hulk, although he wasn't calling it that at the time. And there's still stuff that he pitched at that dinner that hasn't come out in the book yet, and that I can't wait for people to see. Like, Al knows what he's doing. Al has planned the whole thing out.
Wow.
Almost a year later to the day, we're at New York again, and we're going to do our jam session for No Road Home. We don't know it's going to be called that, but we're going to do another weekly. And we're out for dinner, and we're all chatting up a storm. And I said, I've got this weird idea I don't know if this is the place for it, but I just want to bounce it off you two before I pitch it at the table, because it's pretty out there. You know, what if there's something above the structure of reality of the Marvel universe called the House of Ideas, and that it's a story about stories, you know what I mean? And so we talked about this grander sort of insane structure, and I'm pitching this to Mark Waid and Al Ewing at the table, and there's this pause, and I'm like, oh God, they hate it. Like, what are we gonna do? And then Al goes, oh, that's good, like this, right? And then Mark goes, don't pitch that in the morning, because in the morning we're all going to be building structure and everyone's going to be really safe. But once we got tons of momentum and we're all throwing crazy ideas out, I'll tee you up and then you pitch that at the table, because that's awesome. I was like, oh my God, okay. So the next day, that's what we did. We're all, you know, we had lunch, and then the afternoon we're just jamming all sorts of crazy stuff. And at some point, Tom and CB are there, you know, the editor-in-chief and the Avengers editor. And Tom goes, this is all great stuff, but what's it leading to? What's the payoff? And then Mark just looks across the table and he goes, Jim knows. And I was like, okay. And I sort of like did this insane pitch for this big structural thing. And this weird payoff that we were going to have around the House of Ideas and all these eras of characters and all this stuff. And CB stopped and he said, you guys, you know, it's the 80th anniversary of Marvel next year, right? And I was like, no. And he goes, it's perfect. It's perfect. We're doing it. I was just like, oh my God, this is great. So one of my biggest pitches, thankfully, I've actually been able to pull off. I have other stuff that I've pitched, or characters that I've like needled away at editorial, desperately trying to get, and I will continue to needle away at and desperately try to get. I have a big DC thing I want to do, and I've had like a toehold on doing it a couple times, and then it's fallen through, and that's kind of driven me a little bit insane, because, you know, like it feels like one of those projects that once it comes out, everyone's going to be like, well, of course, you know, but it will be like a 5 or 6 year process for me to try and crowbar this thing into existence. So
Character, can we get a little hint?
it is, I know it's the thing, it's a Batman thing, but it's not like it's crazy stuff. So you know, you're hopeful that at some point you get to play with the big toy, but we'll see. I try not to, you can't, when you're starting out working on this stuff, every single project feels like, you know, do or die. Like, if I don't get a chance to do this thing, I'll never. Why, you know, you see a lot of that with artists where they're like, oh, you know, I want to draw Wolverine, and if I don't get the chance to draw Wolverine, why have I been doing this, or my career, or anything? And you're like, it's not like that. Like, you can't think like that. You're going to get cool opportunities, and you got to kind of make the most of those and make hay with them and make them cool. And then don't worry about, like, pitch the dream books when you can. Let people know this is what you're excited about, and if you have your druthers, that's the character you want to work on. But that's okay. Like, you know, there's other cool things. The stuff I've been able to work on before I did a dream character like Conan surprised me so much and pushed me into areas I never would have imagined in terms of my creativity and brainstorming and working with amazing artists. And those are the opportunities that are going to kind of sideswipe you and take you in new directions. And that's been really exciting. If anything, when they offered me Conan, I was scared, because I finally had a chance to do something on a dream character, and you're like, oh, now if I screw it up, I'll have like failed myself. You know what I mean? Like, it's not to say that I want to ever do a bad job, but you can be a little more fearless with a character that you haven't grown up with, you know what I mean? And have those deep roots with. You can just sort of go, well, we're going to throw some stuff against the wall and hopefully you like it. But then when they finally hand you the key to something, you're like, uh-oh, you know, 10-year-old me would have died for this. You know, I had this weird moment where I did those 3 issues of Savage Sword of Conan, and they were actually supposed to be, that was my first time solo writing Conan the Barbarian, because I'd co-written the character with Gail Simone on Conan Red Sonja back in 2015. And then I did, you know, No Road Home with Conan. And this Savage Sword story I did 3 issues last summer. That was supposed to be it. That was like, okay, finally I can get no offense to my co-writers, but like do it myself, this is what I think an iconic Conan story is. Here's all the ingredients and why it works, and do something hopefully a little different, but in my own way. And I kind of dropped the mic as far as I was concerned, like, that's Conan, there you go. And I was ready to walk away, and it went over really well. And all of a sudden editorial was like, you should do more Conan. I was like, oh, I thought that was my statement on Conan, and instead it was an audition. And it's like, oh crap.
Now what?
And when they offer me the monthly book, I'm like, now I got to drop the mic every month. Like, oh God, okay, cool, great. This
Pressure's
is the best. Yeah, no pressure. Just going to make the best sword and sorcery comics every month. Other than that, no problem. You know.
We've got one question from Carlo, who loved your work on Samurai Jack, wondering
Thank
what
you.
that experience was like, and are you doing any Samurai Jack in the future?
So Samurai Jack was a really unique opportunity. I was kind of between projects. I had been offered a different project at IDW, and I turned it down because I was supposed to do a DC project. And I was like really nervous about this DC project. And I was sort of putting all my brain power into it. And I was like, I don't want to try and do two at the same time, which is funny because now I'm like juggling 4 or 5 projects constantly. But at the time, it felt like I can do one monthly book, and that's all I'm capable of, and without screwing it up. And then the DC project fell through, and all of a sudden I was sort of adrift. And I called back IDW and was like, I know this is a real dick move. Is that still available? And they were like, no. And I was like, oh. And so I said, well, keep me in mind for anything else. And like 2 days later, one of the editors at IDW contacted me and said, we're taking pitches on Samurai Jack. Do you like that? Do you know it? And I was like, oh, I know it. The cartoon's amazing. So they were taking multiple pitches. It was a bake-off, which is where you have multiple writers throwing ideas in a hat. What I didn't know about that was one of the people pitching was Andy Siriano, who worked on the show as a character designer and did like animation and directing and all sorts of different stuff. He was pitching himself, drawing and writing it. And I was just like, I didn't know this, of course. So I said, when do you need this pitch? And they said like Monday, and it was like a Thursday. And I just went, oh God. So that night I like threw on some of my favorite episodes and watched them and kind of got into the mode, and then just wrote this pitch like, all right, here's what I would do with Samurai Jack. Just kind of blew it out and sent it in on the Monday. And a couple of weeks later, they contacted me and they said, you know, the gig is yours. You're going to be writing Samurai Jack. And I found out later, Andy and I, we launched the book, I think at Emerald City that year. We had like a convention variant and stuff like that. They set us up side by side. We were signing up a storm. He was drawing amazing stuff. He drew, you know, the issue. He was drawing it. And we were having a weird conversation. And I was, you know, kind of self-effacing and just like, oh, you know, I'm still trying to figure myself out. And, you know, I'm so thankful that I get to do this thing. And, you know, I hope we get to keep it going. And he just looks at me and he goes, you don't know how you got this gig, do you? I'm like, what? He goes, I basically had the gig, like it was mine. I was supposed to write and draw the book. And then your pitch came in and I read your pitch and I wanted to draw your pitch more than I wanted to draw mine.
Wow.
And that's why you got the gig. And I was like, oh my God. He goes, yeah, I basically had a stacked deck to do the book by myself, but I wanted to draw your story. I love it. I'm having an absolute blast. You should be very proud of it. And I was just like, whoa. And that was like the most validating, cool thing I had heard in so long. Andy's so amazing. We did just a wicked run on that book. It was supposed to be a 5-issue miniseries. And then like issue 4, they were like, will you guys just keep it going as an ongoing? And I was like, yeah, I got tons of ideas. I can do this all day. And so I wrote 5 more and they said, it'll probably end at 10. And then at issue 9, they were like, do you want to do 5 more? I was like, yep, I'm down. And the funniest thing was we got to like issue 14 and they said, you guys go to 20? And I was like, yep, no problem. And by the time we were getting to 18, in my head, I assumed they were going to extend us. So I had a huge, epic, crazy story I wanted to do for 21 to 25. And then they told us, okay, we're done at 20. And I was like, oh God, okay. So what I had to do was I took this idea I had for like, because we didn't know there was going to be another season of the show. I basically made issue 20 like a coda, like, okay, this is what it's all about. This is what I think Samurai Jack is. And if they never end the show, here's a way to kind of pseudo end it in a way that hopefully satisfies people. And we got some great press for it. We were super happy. But because of that, I kind of put my stamp on it and said, that's what I think Samurai Jack is. And that's what I feel really strongly about it. And I'm glad that Gendy went back and they did the 5th season and they wrapped it all up. I kind of feel like I said everything I want to say. Like, I do have that other story that I wanted to do, but it feels weird to do it now because there is an actual ending to the show and because they've kind of gone past it in terms of other material. So I don't think I'll go back to Samurai Jack. I don't want to be like a bad cover band or, you know, like trying to recapture. We had something really amazing that we did for those 20 issues. I'm so happy there's an omnibus and you can buy all of them in one big block and it's there and I'm super proud of it. But yeah, I don't think I would go back to it. Not because I don't love it. I think the show is great. I love that people still watch it and they're crazy about it and that the comics are very highly regarded, but we kind of like, yeah, we just sort of nailed it and said what we wanted to say, which is what you hope you're able to do, you know? Yeah.
We have another question from Robbie. Hi, Jim, longtime fan and occasional reviewer here. I'm
Awesome.
curious about the D&D and Pathfinder comics you've done.
Mm-hmm.
So first question, how do you balance the game mechanics with the story and action? 2, how much are you allowed to influence the lore canon of the properties? For instance, in the Pathfinder comics, you made Mauricio and Empyre Avengers. Thank you. Yep. Then the audio dramas followed suit afterwards. Are there any, and then third, are there any tabletop games you'd like to write comics for and haven't had the opportunity yet? Thank you and keep up the great work.
No problem. They just plugged into one of my favorite things. So I'm a huge tabletop role-playing game nerd. Absolutely love that stuff. My brother and I bonded over Dungeons and Dragons. Like, it kind of made our friendship when we were younger and gave us something in common beyond comics. Like, we were just, D&D was a thing, you know, that we were so into. He was 4 years older than me. So when you're like 8 and someone's 12, it doesn't seem like a big gap, but that's, you know, like half my life. And so we had trouble kind of socializing and D&D became the thing. And so it's very near and dear to me. It means a lot to be able to work on Dungeons and Dragons officially, to be able to work on stuff like Pathfinder and tabletop role-playing games in general. I've played dozens and dozens of different games, and I joke around that, like, no one can make a role-playing game comic unless I, you know, like, give it the stamp now, because I feel like I've written so many of the damn things. I've written more D&D comics than anyone else, and I plan to continue that run as long as humanly possible. So no one can catch up to me. Pathfinder was a really awesome opportunity because before I did comic writing, I was doing some artwork for role-playing games, and I did some artwork for Paizo, the guys that make Pathfinder. They were the publishers of Dungeon and Dragon magazine, the fan magazines for D&D, before they became the company that made Pathfinder. So I had done some artwork for their magazine, and I knew their publisher, and I knew their art director and a bunch of people over there. And when Skull Kickers came out, my creator-owned, you know, sort of sword and sorcery comedy, I sent them copies, and they really liked it. And Eric Amona, who's the publisher over there, he literally said to me at Gen Con that year, if we ever do a Pathfinder comic, you should write it. And I was like, if you ever do a Pathfinder comic, you better call me. And a year later at Gen Con, he's like, hey, I'm taking you out for lunch. I'm like, yeah, cool, no problem. We go out for lunch. I just think we're going to catch up. And he goes, do you remember the conversation we had last year? And I said, you guys are making Pathfinder comics? And he goes, oh, you remembered? I said, yeah, of course. And he goes, well, I want you to write it. I said, I will. And that was that. Like, that was sort of how we kind of got the ball rolling there. And it didn't take too much to convince Dynamite, because I had some, you know, stuff they could show and whatever. But they had never done stories with what they called the iconics, those characters, Mauricio and you know, all the different characters that were in that they were using in all their advertising. They had never done stories with those characters. They had done fiction with other new characters that they had made. They had done all sorts of stuff, but they had never done stuff with the iconics. And so this was a big deal. They were like, we're going to let you write the iconics. You're going to set their voices. You're going to sort of set their personalities. We see them in the artwork on the boxes and in the books. So you get a sense of, you know, they're adventurous, but you don't necessarily associate certain speech patterns or personality traits. You know, we want you to set the bar on that. And one of the things we talked about pretty early on was representation. So they did a really good job of diversifying the races of the characters. And we were talking about sexuality. And I said, look, you know, I think it would be good to, we were kind of back and forth about it. And so we made a decision, like with Paizo, obviously their knowledge and approval, that, you know, these characters were going to be in a relationship. We were going to show it over the course of the adventure and stuff like that. And so that was very much by design. So it was something that they were enthusiastic about, and we sort of helped kind of build into it. And I'm thrilled that they've carried that characterization forward, that they have been smart enough to realize that these, you know, comics are part and parcel of the broader kind of imprint, and that they you know, it's all canon, right? So that was something really cool. I did 3 arcs of Pathfinder, 19 issues in total. It was like 18 regular issues and then like a double-sized annual. And it was a ton of fun. I had a great time on it. It was a really cool thing. The weirdest part is that I wrote quite far ahead because I was really obsessed with trying to do the best job possible and not screw it up. And when I wrapped up my run a few months later, I got the offer to do Dungeons and Dragons, and there were still Pathfinder comics coming out when I was starting to write D&D. And I was like, oh, the fan base is going to freak out, because it's like, I'm doing both at the same time. And there's, you know, not animosity. It's just sort of like writing for Marvel and DC simultaneously. It's like a weird sort of thing. But obviously doing the D&D books, that was a really cool opportunity in a different way, where 5th edition was launching, and I was going to get to do this, you know, tie-in comic and stuff like that. And I made it very clear to them. They wanted, I think in the original proposal they sent to me, they wanted me to do some like epic armies and fighting, you know, massive, huge epic scale. And I was like, if we start epic, how do we build after that? Like, it just feels like we there's nowhere to go, you know, after that point. I said, to me, D&D always feels like, you know, 5 idiots go in a hole and you go on adventures. Like, it's like small, scrappy, and weird. Can I have a small, scrappy, and weird D&D comic? And that's when they kind of came back to me and said, there's this character called Minsk. He's like this weird warrior who's kind of, let's say, brain damaged. Like, he's like a warped character. You could do some really fun stuff with him and have him on these adventures and figure out how to bring him back into continuity and all this stuff. So that's kind of what we did. And with each miniseries, we've now done 5 miniseries of Dungeons and Dragons. We've built up to epic. So now in the current one, Infernal Tides, there's huge epic things happening, but you feel like you've earned it. Like, at each point they've kind of progressed and built up to it, which has been really cool. And the D&D people have been amazing. They treat me really, really well. They love what I've done. And because my editor at IDW didn't actually play D&D, they were worried about the deadlines and stuff. And I was worried about like making everything, you know, does this feel like it could really happen in D&D? I'm more picky about that stuff than almost anyone else on the team. I'm sending the reference material. I'm looking up the maps. I'm double checking, you know, could this really happen? And the D&D people really appreciate that. And so we've now interfaced so much that they get me involved in other parts of the game process. So I've done story consulting for the main game line.
Wow.
My wife and I have co-written, along with a friend of ours, Andrew Wheeler. We wrote these series for Random House called the Young Adventurers Guides that are made to bring new people into the hobby of D&D. I've done all kinds of other sort of, you know, dialogue stuff and story stuff for D&D as a whole, and it's just been an absolute joy to work with them. And thankfully I can be a bit of a fanboy about it. Like, I'll just email them crazy ideas and weird stuff, and they're just like, we're not able to do that because of this, but please keep sending us stuff. We really love, you know, talking to you about all these things. And I'm always pitching them warped crazy crap, just because I love D&D so much. In terms of role-playing games, I haven't had a chance to write for. Vampire the Masquerade and the White Wolf games were really big to me in the 90s. I know Vault's got the license now, and I've kind of like poked them a little bit, like, hey, what are you guys doing? What's going on over there? That stuff's cool. I like that stuff. And so I'm definitely intrigued. I would love to do something in the World of Darkness. I also really like, there's a tabletop game it's a little more obscure, but it's one of my favorites. It's this tabletop role-playing game called Feng Shui, and it's basically Hong Kong action movie role-playing game. And it's got time travel and cybernetics and martial arts and all this crazy crap in it. It feels like kind of throw everything in the kitchen sink into a setting. It is so much fun. And I love playing that game with my friends. And so there's a guilty part of me that would love to do a comic. I don't know if anyone would buy it. Like, I don't know if anyone would know what it was, but that would be a super fun action-packed comic book that I would go balls to the wall with, big time. So, yeah.
Nice.
I'm imagining Feng Shui as like a logo, and
Right?
I'm like,
I'll grab the book here. Hold on, I'll show you what it looks like. It's such a cool book.
and titles like that does make you kind of want to go, what the
is
heck?
that?
I got to read that. Good times.
Rad.
So yeah, this is one of the scenario guides for it or whatever. This is like the limited edition they did when they did a Kickstarter a little while back. It's a beauty. It's
That's
such a
the logo
cool.
I was imagining.
Yeah, it's such a cool book, and it's just an amazing game. It's super fun, and it's like one of the things I love about it is the crazier the action gets, the more fun everyone's having. Like, it's all about describing the slow-mo moment from the movie, you know, and all the cool stuff you're gonna do. Yeah, it's just it's an absolute blast. So
That's fun.
cool.
And Robbie says, thank you. I'm going to have to check that game out. And I also adore, I'm not going to say the name again. So thank you for making that canon.
No problem. My absolute pleasure. It's a thrill to be able to any of this stuff, whether that's the superhero stuff or Pathfinder, any of it, you know, putting new pieces into it and having people you know, build on it. When I took over Champions and we made a new, you know, superhero, we made a new Canadian superhero named Snowguard. And she was this indigenous Canadian character, and we got like coverage in the national newspaper, and I was on the Canadian national news talking about this new Marvel superhero. Like, and now I go to a Canadian convention and people will come over and they'll bring over the first appearance, or they'll ask me to do a sketch of her or something like that. That lasts, that has an effect on people, you know? And so I try not to take any of this stuff for granted, that we're making cool stories and hopefully inspiring people to make their own stuff and to, you know, do more and be more, you know? So.
Love it. Love
Cool.
it.
We're getting tight on time, but I have a couple
I think
we're
I've
over
got
time, but there's still a million things that I need to know.
I haven't even gotten to my questions yet.
Uh-oh. I've got to wrap it up soon, unfortunately.
No,
For sure.
No, we're gonna wrap
But
it
you
up.
mentioned Batman. Is there a big time character that you're wanting to do? What's your dream thing? I'm getting at.
I want to do Doctor Strange big time. I've got a big plan. Like I said, the magic of the Marvel universe kind of thing. So Doctor Strange is definitely a big one. I'd love to do something with Spider-Man, of course, you know, because I grew up on that character. I'm intimidated by the concept of Spider-Man stuff, but would love to get a crack at it, of course.
And what about creators? What, like an artist, somebody that you haven't worked with that you would love to work with?
So he did one alt cover for one of the books I worked on. He did an alt cover for Thunderbolts, but Arthur Adams was like the guy. Like what those X-Men annuals, whenever Art would draw it or Longshot or stuff like that, that meant it was a big deal. And so having an Arthur Adams story would be the most indulgent thing I can imagine. That's definitely top of my list. Yeah.
Can't go wrong there.
No, you know, classic for a reason, big time.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Jim, this has been a ton of fun. Like I say, we could go on for another hour, but I want to keep you. Thank you so much for joining us.
My absolute pleasure.
This was really big for me. As I say, I'm a huge Avengers guy. I've really enjoyed your work. I'm a huge Samurai Jack guy. On and on I could go. So it's a really big thrill to have you, and I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for supporting my work, and thanks to your customers and everyone who, you know, reads the books and tells other people about them, because that's how this stuff continues to grow. So it means a lot. Thank you for having me. Wishing you guys all the best.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you
Take
so
care.
much. Thanks so much.
Bye.